The turkey steam curled around my wrist. Gravy shimmered in the bowl like it always did. But this year, nothing felt right. Not the smell of pie. Not the clink of forks. Not the way Will avoided my eyes. Then Tessa leaned close. Her breath warm, her voice soft. "That baby isn't your son's," she whispered. Just like that, Thanksgiving cracked. I didn't flinch. I didn't drop the plate. I placed it on the table, steady hands hiding a quaking chest. Will was still talking about traffic. My granddaughter hummed beside the fireplace. No one noticed my heart had stopped. Tessa sipped her cider, smile painted perfect. I'd baked for 6 hours, ironed the tablecloth, polished the silver. And she chose now. She chose here. The room smelled like burnt cinnamon and betrayal. I excused myself, said I forgot the cranberry sauce. In the kitchen, the fridge light flickered. The pie cooling on the counter looked untouched. So much effort. So many years. For this, I gripped the edge of the sink. Why would she say that? Why now, and why me? That baby, if it wasn't Will's, then whose? My eyes stung. But no tears, not yet. Instead, I looked out the frosted window. Tessa's coat hung on the rack, pink, clean. Too expensive for Will's paycheck. I'd noticed things. Little things. Late phone calls. Garden visits that didn't make sense. Still, I gave her the benefit. I gave her pie. I gave her a home. Now she gave me this. Don't make a scene. I told myself, not tonight. Not in front of my son. Not until I'm sure. But something in me shifted. Something cold and sharp. I turned off the stove, tucked the dish towel straight, and walked back in. Smile in place. Hands steady. But inside, the question screamed. That baby isn't Will's. So who does it belong to? And what am I supposed to do with that? Would you stay quiet or speak the truth? Comment below, 1 for silence, 2 for justice. The first winter without Hank, the snow came early. Will was 6. Too young to understand what death really meant. Too young to know why his father's boots never moved from the doorway. But I understood. The nights were long back then. Oil heater ticking, radio static from the old AM. I'd sit at the kitchen table, sewing up the rips in Will's coat. He'd fallen again, trying to build a snow fort alone. I'm making it strong like Dad's garage, he told me. That night, I kissed his scraped chin, tied his scarf twice, and whispered, "You're already stronger, sweetheart." We didn't have much. Hank had left behind a stack of library overdue notices and an old Dodge with a rusted muffler. But the house was ours, and the table was never empty. Every Friday, I'd make apple bread. The scent filled the house like it used to when Hank came home whistling. Except now, no one whistled, just the wind. One night, I found Will curled under the kitchen table, clinging to his father's work gloves. He didn't cry. Neither did I. We just sat there. The floor was cold, but his small hand found mine, and I knew, no matter how hollow the house felt, I wasn't alone. Years passed in teaspoons, scraping by, coupons clipped, socks darned. Homework spread across the counter while I stirred stew with one hand. Will grew. His shoulders widened. His laugh changed. And every Thanksgiving, I set the table with Hank's old silver. Not because I needed the shine, but because tradition held the house together when nothing else could. Even when Will moved out, even when he married a girl I barely knew, I still baked the apple bread, still ironed the tablecloth, still left one chair for memory's sake. Maybe that's what love becomes when you get older, not fireworks, but rituals, not loud, but steady. Like the sound of Will's boyhood laughter in a house that no longer echoed back. The first time I met Tessa, it was a Sunday brunch. Will had driven up from Madison with her, his arm proudly around her waist, a grin so wide it nearly cracked his face. She wore a cream sweater dress and boots without a scuff. Her nails gleamed, not chipped from laundry soap like mine always were. She called me Mrs. Ward at first, too polite, too polished, but her smile, it didn't touch her eyes. Still, I tried. I made my lemon scones, poured tea into Hank's old mugs, the ones Will loved as a boy. I asked about her work, her family, where she grew up. She answered, sweet, airy, practiced. Not once did she ask about Will's childhood, or Hank, or the old photos framed by the fireplace. But I let it pass. When they got engaged 6 months later, Will called me from the airport. "Isn't she incredible, Mom?" His voice was high, giddy, like when he'd found his bike under the Christmas tree. I swallowed the hesitation and said, "She seems lovely." Because that's what mothers do, right? They smile through worry. They iron dresses they can't afford to buy. They bite their tongues when the girl their son chose skips his birthday dinner but posts selfies from a winery instead. Still, I gave her chances. I let her take over Thanksgiving desserts. I let her repaint the guest room coral pink. I nodded when she called our town quiet and charming, the way city folks do when they're really saying, "as boring." Will changed too. He started coming around less. Texts got shorter. "No more 'Hi Mom, made your soup today, just busy. Tessa wants to rest." It stung, not in a dramatic way, but in small cuts, like realizing he no longer noticed when I changed the porch wreath, or that he didn't ask for apple bread anymore. Still, I kept setting the table, because maybe love is stubborn like that. It doesn't ask for permission to hope. It just keeps the chair warm, just in case. But now, sitting at the same kitchen window where I once watched Will chase snowflakes, I can't help but wonder. Had I invited the storm in, trying too hard to make her feel welcome? Did I trade my silence for this slow disappearance? There was one moment, just one, when I thought maybe I'd misjudged her. It was after my fall last winter, ice on the back porch, hidden under a dusting of snow. I'd been carrying a bag of birdseed, as I did every Tuesday. The world tipped. My elbow slammed first, then my pride. I don't remember calling anyone. But suddenly Tessa was there. She brought soup, split pea with ham, not homemade, but warm. She sat on the edge of the chair, coat still on, purse in her lap. "You shouldn't live alone out here," she said softly. "It's not safe for someone your age." I thanked her, told her I was fine, but she stayed 15 more minutes, asking if I'd considered moving closer to Madison. Closer to them. At the time, I thought, maybe she cared. Maybe we'd just had a rocky start. But now I see it different. The way she looked around my kitchen, at the old cabinets, the framed recipes, the china passed from my mother. That wasn't concern in her eyes. It was calculation. And the soup. It was still warm when I found the real estate brochure in my mailbox 2 days later. Assisted living. Brochure folded twice, no note. Just the image of smiling seniors and the tagline, "Alive safe, live simple." I told myself it was a mistake, that maybe she was trying to help. But now, after what she whispered last night, that memory tastes bitter. Maybe the signs were always there. The way she flinched when I touched her shoulder. The way she never ate more than half a slice of my pie. The way Will stood straighter when she entered the room, like waiting for permission to speak. How had I missed it? Or worse, had I chosen not to see? Because seeing meant losing, and losing him again, after already losing Hank. That was a kind of pain I wasn't ready for. But I'm ready now. Because the truth, as ugly as it may be, is still better than disappearing in plain sight. The chair is still warm. But this time, I won't wait for someone else to sit in it. This time, I'll decide who belongs at my table. It started with a photo. One of those old, gold-edged frames that had sat on the mantel for over 2 decades. Hank holding Will at age 9, grinning wide, arms slung with fish from the lake. I was in the background, apron on, eyes squinting into the sun. Tessa moved it last week. Said she needed space for the baby announcement board. "Too many shadows," she'd murmured, as if my memory left a stain. I didn't argue. But last night, when I walked past the fireplace and saw only her sonogram, black and white, pinned next to a felt banner that read, "Little Miracle Coming Spring 2023 of," my throat dried like paper. Will had been standing beside her, his hand resting protectively on her lower back. He didn't look up, didn't ask where the picture had gone. That photo, it had seen storms, birthdays, quiet winters. It had survived when I didn't think I could. Now it was in a drawer somewhere, replaced. Like me. This morning, Tessa offered to make coffee. She didn't ask how I liked it, just set a cup down. Milk swirling too pale, one sugar too many. Then she sat across from me, her voice syrupy, sweet. You've done so much for Will, I hope you know that. It wasn't gratitude. It was a eulogy. You must be excited to slow down now, she added. Let us take care of things. Her tone had a shine to it, like new shoes. But it pinched. I nodded, folded my hands. Outside, snow drifted against the fence Hank built. The rose trellis hung bare. Of course, I said. Let me know how I can help. She smiled. All teeth, like I just signed something I hadn't read. Later that afternoon, we gathered in the living room. Tessa was leading some sort of nursery planning session, sketching ideas on a notepad with soft pink pens. Will laughed when she suggested painting the guest room coral again, the same color I had quietly painted over 2 years ago. Mom, you don't mind, right? He asked. No eye contact, just assumption. I said nothing. Not out of agreement, but because I didn't recognize the boy in front of me anymore. He used to bring me library cards he made from cereal boxes. He used to write "Thank you, Mom" in smudged crayon. Now, he offered me silence in return for peace. Then came the comment that cut sharper than I expected. Tessa was talking about names. Baby names. She turned to me, tilted her head. You know, she said gently, we're thinking of avoiding Eleanor. It feels a bit heavy. Will chuckled. Yeah, something fresher. Something fresher. As if the years I'd lived, the hands I'd held, the family I'd fed, were all out of season. I smiled, took a sip of that too sweet coffee, and stood. I'll get the laundry. No one offered to help. No one noticed I hadn't touched my pie. In the hallway, I stopped by the coat rack. The drawer below held the frame. I opened it. There we were, Hank, Will, me, frozen in a summer long gone. My thumb brushed the glass. I hadn't just been moved. I'd been erased. And erasure is never accidental. Not when it's framed in pastel colors and pretty lies. Not when it's served with coffee that never tasted like yours. The bank statement came in a pale blue envelope, same as always. I almost didn't open it. These days, most things went paperless. This one must have slipped through the cracks. I stood by the window, the radiator clanking to life behind me, and peeled it open with one finger. The numbers didn't make sense. A withdrawal of $8,000, another of $5,000, 2 weeks later. Then one for $3,000, labeled Doll's nursery supplies. Nursery, I blinked, checked the account number again. It was the household savings account. The one Hank and I opened in '87, back when interest was still worth something. Will was on it too, ever since the car accident in '09. I'd added his name so he could help in emergencies. But this wasn't an emergency. This was theft. I reached for my reading glasses and traced the line of the signature authorizing the most recent transaction. It wasn't mine. It looked like mine. But off. Too clean, too slow. Like someone had practiced it. I sat down, the chair cushion letting out a soft wheeze beneath me. My fingers shook. Not from age, but from the clarity settling in. This wasn't just a daughter-in-law overstepping. This was a daughter-in-law reaching into the pocket of a woman she'd rather forget. I called the bank. A young voice answered. Professional, polite. I asked about the withdrawals. She paused. Said someone had come in person. Presented ID. Claimed to be handling family medical costs. I asked for the name. A pause again. Then, Tessa Ward. The sound of her name sent a flush up my neck. I didn't yell. Didn't cry. I thanked the girl. Hung up. Then sat there staring at the white lace curtains fluttering against the pane. Tessa had forged my signature. She had walked into my bank, smiled at someone behind a desk, and taken money I'd saved for the roof. For the furnace. For peace of mind. All without blinking. I reached for the teapot but set it back down. No more comfort. No more pretending. Somewhere upstairs, Tessa was laughing. I heard the faint trill of her voice, the light thud of Will's footsteps, the hum of their new life building itself on top of mine. I looked at the paper again. This time, I didn't just feel violated. I felt awake. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind clawed at the windows, but it was the stillness inside that made my chest tight. I sat in my room, lamp dimmed low, The bank statement spread across the quilt like evidence in a courtroom. I opened the drawer of my bedside table. Inside were old receipts, birthday cards from Will, a photograph of Hank holding Will on his shoulders at the lake. Beneath them, tucked beneath a packet of garden seeds long expired, I found a manila folder. It wasn't mine. I opened it carefully. Inside, copies of documents I never remembered signing. One labeled Power of Attorney. Another titled Property Transfer Authorization. All bore my name, all had my signature, and none were mine. The scrawl looked close, but I knew my own pen. The curve of the W in Ward was too tall. The E in Eleanor too neat. Tessa had been planning this, not just withdrawing cash. She was laying groundwork, transferring rights, stealing slowly. Turning my home into hers one line at a time, I held the paper to my chest. It was more than betrayal. It was erasure. Not all at once, but deliberate, like chipping away at a name etched in stone until there was nothing left but dust. Downstairs, the kitchen light flicked on. I heard footsteps. A refrigerator door. Her laugh, again low, soft. She wasn't afraid. She believed I'd never look, never ask, never fight. She thought age meant weakness, that I'd fade quietly while she folded my house into her future. But she was wrong. I got up, pulled the file into my cardigan pocket, walked down the stairs barefoot, the cold floor sharp against my heels. At the hallway closet, I opened the file drawer. Inside, Hank's old lockbox, black steel, tucked behind faded envelopes. I placed the forged documents beside it, then locked the box, slipped the key into the pocket of my robe. I wasn't ready to confront them. Not yet. But I wasn't blind anymore. As I stood in the doorway, staring at the staircase wrapped in shadow, a thought came sharp and quiet. Had they ever truly meant to keep me in their lives, or was I always just in the way? The question didn't ache. It anchored. And somewhere deep inside, something finally started to turn. The days that followed blurred together. Will left for work each morning without saying goodbye. His truck pulled out of the driveway at 7:05 sharp. I'd watch from the window, coffee in hand, wondering if he even noticed I wasn't asleep anymore. Tessa stayed behind. She moved through the house like she owned it, changed the curtains in the guest room, rearranged the pantry, started ordering groceries without asking what I needed. One afternoon, I found the flour tin labeled non-essential in bold marker. It wasn't just space she was taking. It was my rhythm. The house no longer smelled like lemon cleaner and old books. It smelled like vanilla candles and control. No one spoke cruelly. No one raised a voice. But silence can bruise, too. I stopped using the kitchen in the morning, stopped sitting in the living room, retreated to the sunroom with my tea and crossword puzzles, pretending the light there warmed me. It didn't. I felt like a guest in the house I'd scrubbed, painted, fixed, and kept breathing for 40 years. And then Kara appeared. She was 14, maybe 15. Lived 2 houses down with her grandmother, who couldn't drive anymore. I'd seen her before. Braids, denim jacket, always walking fast like the world was late. That Wednesday, she knocked on my back door. Not the front, never the front. Smart girl. I opened it to find her holding a bag of canned goods and cereal. Grandma got an extra delivery. She said to share with you. I blinked. I didn't ask for. Kara shrugged. She said you'd say that. She walked off before I could respond. The next morning, there was a note slipped under my sunroom door. You still make the best apple bread. Don't let her stop you. No name. Just a drawing of a teacup and a crooked smile. I stared at the note for a long time. Someone had noticed. Someone saw. The world hadn't gone blind. Just quieter. And maybe, just maybe, not everyone had stopped listening. The next time Kara came by, it was with a deck of old recipe cards. Grandma said you'd know what to do with these. She mumbled, setting them on the patio table. I thumbed through them slowly, cursive ink fading, flour smudges along the corners. My own handwriting stared back at me on one card. Pier Cobbler, Eleanor's version. Sweeter than life. I hadn't seen that card in years. They used to sit together after church, Kara said, kicking her boot against the step. She always liked your stories better than pastors. I smiled before I could stop myself. She noticed. You okay? She asked. Getting there. We sat in silence, the kind that doesn't press. She pulled out a notebook and began sketching. Windows, vines, something that looked like the porch railing. I watched her hand move. So confident. Do you draw often? She shrugged. Only places that feel like they're about to disappear. I turned back to the recipe cards. Under the last one, folded tight, was a sticky note. Not Kara's handwriting this time. It read, check the file drawer in the hallway. Bottom left. I looked up, but Kara was already halfway to the fence. That evening, after Tessa left for her prenatal yoga class, I opened the hallway drawer. Behind expired insurance papers and a stack of glossy baby magazines, I found a manila envelope, no label, just taped shut. I peeled it open. Inside, printouts of emails, scans of notarized letters, photos of property appraisals with my address on top, but not my name listed below. The buyer, a shell company, registered 2 towns over. The contact name, Tessa L. Ward. I sank onto the hallway bench, paper slipping from my hand. She wasn't just moving in. She was trying to move me out. I clutched the envelope tight. She thought no one was watching, but someone was. A teenage girl with 2 big boots and a sharp eye. Hope doesn't always show up with flowers. Sometimes it knocks on the back door with a recipe card and a pencil in its sleeve. And suddenly, I didn't feel quite so invisible anymore. The invitation came on pale pink cardstock. Tessa's baby shower. Hosted at the Whitmore Clubhouse. The kind of place with tall ceilings, white linen, and no room for old women with dishwater hands. Still, I showed up. Wore my navy dress. The one Hank always said made my eyes look less tired. I brought a gift. Handmade baby booties, knitted in soft gray yarn. Wrapped in paper I'd saved from Will's first birthday. When I arrived, no one offered to take my coat. Tessa greeted me with a glance, then turned back to a group of women holding sparkling cider. Eleanor. She called after a beat. Glad you could come. You found the place all right. Like I hadn't lived in this town 38 years. I nodded, forced a smile. Beautiful decorations. They are. Aren't they? She said. My cousin did them. She's got such a modern touch. I placed the gift on the table. It looked small next to towers of store-bought boxes. Glittering, loud, expensive. Tessa's friends gathered in circles. No one asked how I was. No one offered a seat. I stood near the punch, clutching a glass I didn't want. Then Tessa tapped a spoon against the edge of her cider. I just want to thank everyone for coming today. This little one, she patted her belly gently, is already so lucky to be surrounded by such support, such fresh energy. There were giggles. And I especially want to thank my mother-in-law for being here, she added, turning to me. My heart lifted. Too quickly. She smiled wide. Eleanor's been a constant. A true traditionalist. Still uses a checkbook, bless her. Laughter bubbled through the room. I didn't move. She even brought us these little booties. So sweet, right? Hand knit. I told Will we might need to get a special shelf for vintage items. More laughter. Not cruel, just dismissive, like I was quaint. A relic. Something to pat on the head and move aside. Will stood near the back, plastic cup in hand. He didn't laugh. But he didn't stop it either. That hurt more. I set my punch down, untouched. My fingers left prints on the glass. I walked toward the restroom. Not because I needed it, but because I needed to breathe without everyone watching me vanish. Inside, I looked at myself in the mirror. Foundation too dry. Lipstick cracked, booties gray, fresh energy, that's what she called it, as if wisdom had expired, as if years of sacrifice could be outgrown, like last season's shoes. I pulled the gift card from my purse. I had written, to our little miracle, love always, Grandma Eleanor. I crossed out one word, folded the card again, and stepped back into the party. But something in me had shifted. This wasn't just disrespect. It was a declaration, and I wasn't about to disappear quietly. I left before cake. No one noticed. Not Will, not Tessa, not any of the women who had laughed with mouths full of sugar and compliments. Outside, the air cut sharper than I expected. I hadn't worn gloves. Didn't think I'd need armor. The parking lot shimmered with leftover ice. As I slid into the driver's seat, my hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of silence. I drove home with the windows cracked an inch. Let the wind scrub the leftover party scent from my coat. At the house, I didn't go inside right away. I stood on the porch, staring at the frost patterns on the storm door. They looked like veins, fragile, spreading. I stepped in. The air smelled faintly of lemon soap and the heater kicking on. I walked to the mantel, opened the drawer where I'd stashed the family photo Tessa had replaced. Pulled it out, there we were. Will, holding a fish half his size, Hank's arm wrapped around my waist, my own eyes, squinting, hopeful. I set the photo back in its frame, set it upright, right where it used to be. Let her move it again. Let her see. Upstairs, I opened the cedar chest at the foot of my bed, pulled out Hank's old sweater, my wedding veil. A letter from Will in 2nd grade. Mom, I love your cookies and your hugs. You're the best mom in Wisconsin. I traced the crayon heart he'd drawn in the corner. Then I reached for the booties. The ones I'd knit. Still wrapped. Still sitting quietly in the corner of my closet where I'd tucked them before heading to the party. I had brought a second pair, just in case. But now, I knew better. I unwrapped them, ran a finger across the stitches, every loop a silent wish I'd made, every knot a part of me. And I wondered, how many pieces of me had I given without anyone noticing? How much of myself had I trimmed, quieted, folded away to make room? I held the booties tight. Not everything I made was meant to be kept by people who didn't see me. Some things deserved better. I placed them in a new box, labeled it in ink that wouldn't fade. To the grandchild who asks questions, who wants to know where they came from, who believes in stories that don't sparkle but last, I sealed it and put it away. Not out of anger, but because not all love belongs to those who pretend to return it. Some love waits for the right hands, the right ears, and when the time comes, I'll be ready to give again. But only to those who see me. Because I'm done being erased. The envelope came on a Monday, no return address. Just my name in shaky pen, as if the sender wasn't sure they wanted to be remembered. Inside, an invoice. Roof inspection, structural appraisal, pest control. All addressed to my home. All dated last month. I hadn't requested any of it. At first, I assumed it was a clerical error, a neighbor's form misdelivered. But at the bottom of the last page, one line stood out. Client, Larkin Finch Holdings, LLC. My hands stiffened around the paper. I'd seen that name before. Months ago, on a pamphlet Tessa had left near the phone. I thought it was one of her interior design magazines. I slipped the invoice into my purse and drove to the county assessor's office. The woman behind the counter wore a gray cardigan and had a pen tucked into her hair. She looked up when I entered, recognition flickering across her face. Eleanor. Haven't seen you in years. Could say the same, Denise. She offered a polite smile. I placed the paper on the counter. Can you tell me why this was mailed to me? Denise adjusted her glasses, scanned the document, her brow furrowed. Hold on. She tapped at her keyboard, slow but sure. Lines of data blinked across the screen. Then she paused. Property record was updated 2 weeks ago, she said. Primary contact listed as Lark and Finch Holdings. She turned the screen slightly. There was my address. The white house with green shutters Hank had painted one spring. The only home Will had ever known. But under ownership entity, my name was gone. What does that mean, Denise? She didn't answer right away. It means, she said carefully, that someone moved title interest into a corporate trust. It's legal, but unusual if you weren't notified. I wasn't. She leaned in, lowered her voice. There's a note here, power of attorney, signed last fall, notarized, authorizing future transfer upon residency change. I stared at the words like they were written in another language. Residency change. They were waiting for me to leave, or worse, planning to make it happen. My knees went soft. I gripped the counter. Denise stepped around. Sit, Eleanor. I waved her off, jaw set. What happens if I challenge it? She sighed. You'd need proof. That the signature was forged. That the transfer was done without consent. You'd need a lawyer. I nodded slowly. I'll find one. Outside, the wind cut through my coat. But this time, I didn't feel cold. I felt awake. Let them build their web. I had just found the first thread. The moment I got home, I went straight to the hallway drawer. I didn't bother removing my coat. The envelope with the fake power of attorney was still there, tucked behind a stack of unused notepads and expired coupons. I laid it flat on the kitchen table, turned on every light, opened the blinds, let the day flood in, because truth shouldn't hide in shadows. From the desk upstairs, I pulled out my old paperwork box. Tax returns, utility bills, Will's school records, and finally, my real signature, letterhead from the mortgage refinancing in 2012, a warranty document signed after the water heater burst. I laid them side by side. The forged signature curved too clean, too perfect. My hand always looped slightly left. This one leaned stiffly right. My pulse steadied. I wasn't crazy. I was being erased, line by careful line. A knock at the back door made me flinch. Kara stood there, hoodie up, cheeks flushed from the cold. I brought you that memory stick you asked for. I'd told her I needed to scan some things. She hadn't asked why. I waved her in. Together, we worked in silence. She watched as I fed documents into my old scanner, clunky, loud, slow. You think she did all this by herself? She asked quietly. I hesitated. No, I said. But she's the one who smiled while doing it. Kara leaned over, studying the page. She even faked the tail on your. That's obsessive. I smiled despite myself. She's thorough. I'll give her that. Once everything was scanned, we saved 2 copies. One on the memory stick, one on my backup drive, an ancient silver brick Hank had bought from Radio Shack when it still existed. Know what? Kara asked. I opened the drawer under the phone, pulled out a business card I hadn't touched in years. Arthur Miles, attorney at law. He was Hank's friend. Drafted our will. Quiet man. Loved oatmeal cookies. I stared at the card a long moment, then picked up the phone. Voicemail. Arthur, it's Eleanor Ward. I need your help. It's urgent. Call me back anytime. I hung up. Kara was watching me. Not with pity, not with worry, but with something firmer. Belief. I slid the memory stick into a padded envelope, addressed it carefully, and sealed it tight. I'm sending this tonight, I said. Certified mail. Kara nodded. You're not backing down, are you? I shook my head. Not this time. Because some women knit. Some bake. Some forgive. And some fight quietly until the house is theirs again. Sleep didn't come. The house creaked and sighed around me. Old beams settling. Pipes clicking like a distant metronome. I lay in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Heart beating in a rhythm that didn't belong to rest. The heater hissed. A branch tapped gently against the window pane. It sounded like someone trying to knock, but too polite to insist. I turned on the lamp. Soft yellow light spilled across the room, touching framed photos, worn books, and the teacup I hadn't touched since yesterday. The memory came sharp. A night like this one. Years ago, rain hammering the roof in waves. Will was still in college. Hank had just come home from a doctor's appointment he wouldn't talk about. I'd pressed him gently. He'd shaken his head, tired smile on his face. Don't worry about me, he'd said. But if you ever feel yourself disappearing, don't wait for someone to pull you back. I'd blinked. What does that mean? It means, he said, looking straight at me, that some folks won't notice what they're erasing until there's nothing left. Don't make it easier for them. He'd kissed my hand. Gone to sleep. 6 months later, I buried him under oak trees, still slick with spring. Now, in the same bed where he once rested, I turned his words over like a stone in my palm. Don't make it easier for them. I sat up, swung my legs to the floor. The rug felt cool, grounding. I pulled on my cardigan, walked downstairs. The kitchen smelled faintly of oranges and dust. I poured water into the kettle, turned on the stove, waited for the click of ignition. While the flame warmed, I opened the drawer where I kept my old journals. Tucked near the back, one labeled, 1994, the year Will lost his first tooth. The year I nearly lost the house. I flipped through the pages. Lists. Phone numbers. Prayers scribbled in the margins. And then, taped inside the back cover, an old post-it. Hank's handwriting, slanted and messy. You kept us standing when we were too tired to notice. Don't forget who built this home. My throat tightened. I looked around the kitchen. Every chair, every drawer, every worn floorboard. I had built this. I had bent to make room. But I wouldn't bend anymore. Not for someone who repainted over memory and called it modern. Not for someone who smiled while pulling nails from the frame I had nailed in myself. I poured the tea, held the mug close, let the steam rise to my cheeks, and I whispered, just once, into the quiet, I'm still here. Because naming yourself is the first step back from vanishing. At dawn, I opened the curtains wide. Light spilled in across the kitchen tiles, pale and clean, brushing over everything that had been ignored. The tea kettle was still warm from the night before. I poured the last of it into my mug, now cooled but steady in my grip. Then I sat at the table. Pulled a sheet of paper from the drawer. One of the good ones, linen grain, thick enough to hold the weight of ink and intention. I clicked my pen open, noted the date in the corner. Then, in clear handwriting, I wrote, "This is what I know. Tessa forged my name. She rewrought our future and sold a past that didn't belong to her. She moved my picture, my pie tins, my breath from every room, inch by inch. Will watched. Or didn't. Maybe that hurts more. But I am still here." I stopped, listened. Upstairs, the house remained asleep. I continued writing. Today, I will make copies of the property files. Today, I will visit Arthur Miles. Today, I will speak, even if my voice doesn't rise above a whisper yet. And I will no longer explain myself to people who benefit from my silence. I folded the paper in thirds, slipped it into an envelope marked, "If I forget." Then I tucked it behind the photo on the mantel. The one Tessa had once moved. I reached out and straightened the frame. The glass was a little dusty. I left it that way. Because memories aren't meant to sparkle. They're meant to stay. Outside, birds tapped along the fence post. Snow was melting in soft patches, revealing the brittle grass beneath. I opened the front door. Let the cold hit my cheeks full on. I wasn't afraid of weather. I'd survived worse. Back inside, I opened the cabinet and pulled down my recipe binder. Turned to the page marked cinnamon purebred, Hank's favorite. I laid it on the counter. No more watching from the sidelines. No more folding my hands in my lap while my name disappeared from my own story. Let them feel the absence when I stop making it easy. Let them notice what I've held up all these years. And if they don't, then I'll remind them. Arthur Miles hadn't changed much. His office still smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and lemon furniture polish. Same ticking wall clock. Same stack of legal pads on the edge of his desk, like a row of sentries waiting for orders. He stood when I entered, eyes warm behind thick glasses. "Eleanor Ward," he said, voice even. "Haven't heard that name in a while." I offered a tight smile. Didn't think I'd be back, to be honest. He motioned to the chair across from him. Leather cracked but comfortable. "I assume this isn't about updating Hank's will." "No," I said, pulling the envelope from my bag. "It's about protecting what's left of mine." I laid the documents out. Copies of the forged power of attorney, the bank statements, the Lark and Finch property documents. I showed him the signature comparisons. The notes Kara helped me write. The certified mail receipt I'd sent him 2 days ago. He didn't speak much while I talked, just nodded slowly, brows drawn close, lips pressing into a thin line. When I finished, he leaned back, hands steepled. "Do you have any idea how long this has been going on?" "Over a year, I'd guess. Maybe more. The signature on the first document dates back to my last birthday." He glanced at me. The look wasn't pity. It was recognition. "You believe your daughter-in-law orchestrated this?" "I know she did." "And your son?" I hesitated. The words came heavier than I expected. I don't know. That's the worst part. I don't know how much of him is still mine. Arthur nodded once, slowly. Well, he said, reaching for a yellow legal pad. Let's reclaim what's yours. I sat straighter. He explained what we'd need: a handwriting analysis, a formal dispute filed with the county, a cease and desist to Lark and Finch. Will it hold? With what you've shown me, it won't fall apart quietly. I exhaled through my nose. Quiet never worked for me anyway. He offered the faintest smile. I remember. We spent the next hour making lists, paper trails, witnesses' steps. Before I left, I reached into my purse and slid across a check. He pushed it back. You and Hank kept this town's library open for 2 extra winters. We'll sort payment later. I stood at the door. Thank you, Arthur. He gave me a look I hadn't seen in a long time. One men reserve for women they know won't fold. You're not the one who needs thanking. Outside, the sky was turning. The clouds were the color of steel, but the wind smelled of thaw, and I walked back to my car with a spine straighter than it had felt in years. That night, I didn't sleep. Not from worry, but from motion. There are seasons in a woman's life when silence is strength. And then there are seasons when action must take its place. By morning, I'd already made 3 phone calls. The first, to the bank. I revoked all joint authorizations, froze the household account, and requested new documentation under my name only. The woman on the line asked if I was sure. Ma'am, I said gently, I was sure 30 years ago when I built that home from scratch. I'm even more sure now. The second call, my insurance provider. I canceled the automatic beneficiary clause, added a clause for transfer to legal trust under my full control. The third, Arthur. I need a statement, I said. Something that says any further tampering will result in litigation. He didn't hesitate. It'll be on your porch by noon. By mid-afternoon, I was sorting documents into folders. Orange for legal, blue for personal, red for the ones I hoped I'd never have to open again. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Upstairs, Tessa and Will were both out. Some appointment. Another ultrasound, maybe. Another photo to post online for strangers to adore. I opened the bottom drawer of my old writing desk, pulled out a blank envelope. Into it, I slid a copy of the forged documents, Arthur's official letter, a single photo of our home, taken before the shutters were painted over, and a short note, handwritten in ink. I built this once. I won't let it fall twice. No accusation. No anger. Just truth. I sealed the envelope. Wrote Will's name across the front. No dear, no son, just his name. Because names carry weight. And mine had been missing from too many things for too long. I left the envelope on the bench by the stairs, right where he tossed his mail every Friday. Then I turned off the lights. Stepped out to the garden. The roses were gone for the season. But the soil remembered them. I stood there with my gloves on, earth under my boots, wind brushing my cheek. There was nothing dramatic about this kind of fight. No shouting, no slammed doors, just a woman still standing, still home, still hers. Will found the envelope after dinner. He didn't say anything. Just stood there in the hallway, holding it like it was heavier than paper had any right to be. I watched from the kitchen. Steam rising from the sink. My hands deep in suds, scrubbing the casserole dish none of us had really touched. He turned it over once. Twice. Then slipped it into his jacket pocket and walked out the back door. The screen creaked. Then slammed. I didn't follow. An hour passed. I swept. Dried the dishes. Fed the fire in the wood stove until it crackled steady. Upstairs, I heard Tessa's footsteps. Then the bedroom door shut. The house held its breath. At 90:42, Will knocked softly on my doorframe. Mum. I didn't look up from my sewing basket. Just nodded toward the chair across from me. He sat down slow, laid the envelope on the table between us. I read it. I kept threading the needle. The light above us flickered once, then steadied. You wrote that letter? He asked. I tied a knot in the thread, snipped it. I did. He exhaled, leaned forward, elbows on knees. I didn't know. About the documents, the bank stuff, any of it. I looked at him then. really looked. The boy I raised wasn't in that face anymore. But some part of him was watching me from behind those tired eyes. Not knowing, I said slowly. Doesn't mean you weren't standing there while it happened. He flinched. Not much, but enough. I thought she was helping. He murmured. She said she wanted to ease the load. Said you were getting forgetful. I let the silence stretch. I believed her. He added. Because it was easier. That landed. Soft, but sharp. I never asked, he said, what you wanted. If you were okay. I folded the fabric in my lap, pressed the creases flat. No, I said. You didn't. He reached for the envelope again. She forged it all. I nodded. With a steady hand and a smiling mouth. He didn't speak for a while. The stove popped behind us. A log shifted. I don't know what to do now. You don't have to, I said. I already am. He looked at me, confusion flickering. I'm not here to fix your marriage, Will. I'm here to protect what I built. He swallowed hard. But it's my family too. I held his gaze. And you'll have to decide what kind of man you want to be inside it. He didn't move. Didn't argue. Just nodded once. Then got up, left the envelope on the table. Good night, Mom. I didn't reply. Didn't need to. The door clicked softly behind him, and I sat there, threading the next needle. The next morning, I heard her voice before I saw her. Sharp, Tate. Threaded with something I hadn't heard in her before, fear. She was in the laundry room, door half closed, phone pressed tight to her ear. I don't care what the papers say. She's pushing back now. The lawyer's involved. No, I didn't think she'd actually do anything. She's just an old woman, for God's sake. A pause. Then, lower no, Will doesn't know everything. Not yet. I stood in the hallway, didn't move, didn't clear my throat, just listened. Tessa's voice dropped even further, words I couldn't catch. But the tone was all panic, varnished in control. She ended the call. Quick. Then opened the door, and jumped when she saw me standing there. Eleanor, she said too brightly, pressing a hand to her chest. Didn't see you there. I know, I replied. You usually don't. We stood there in the morning light, two women in the same house, but living entirely different truths. Her ponytail was too tight, her blouse too crisp. But her eyes, they flickered. Tough call? I asked, stepping into the laundry room. She blinked, swallowed. I was just handling a delay with the registry. Of course. I leaned against the dryer, folded my arms. Tessa, let me ask you something. She stiffened. The calm slipped a little. I tilted my head. Whose future are you really building? She didn't answer, so I continued. Because I've been watching. Quietly. Long enough to know the difference between creating a life and carving one out of someone else's. Her chin lifted. I've done nothing illegal. Maybe not yet. But you've done plenty immoral. She rolled her eyes. You just don't like change. No, I said, voice even. I don't like theft disguised as reinvention. I don't like manipulation dressed in cashmere, and I don't like watching my son become a guest in his own spine. That landed. Hard. She stepped back, lips parting slightly. You think you know everything, don't you? I know enough. I took a step closer. You see, I thought the worst thing would be losing my home, losing my name on a deed, my place at the table. I paused. But now I realize the worst thing would be letting you think you've won. Tessa's arms dropped. Her bravado wavered. And for the first time since she'd walked into my life in that white sweater dress, she had nothing to say. I turned to leave, paused in the doorway. One more thing. She looked up. When this is over, and it will be, don't say you weren't warned. Then I walked out, kettle whistling behind me like punctuation. She didn't follow. By Thursday the boxes appeared, plain cardboard, stacked neatly by the hallway closet, each one labeled in Tessa's handwriting, slanted, controlled, detached, books, Evlenins, ethnoffice supplies, not memories, not mistakes, just items. Will didn't say much. He helped carry things to the front room, his steps quiet. shoulders rounded in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy being sent to apologize to the neighbor for breaking their window. I didn't interfere. Didn't offer to help. Instead, I stood at the kitchen counter, polishing the copper kettle Hank gave me on our 30th. The one Tessa had tried to retire to the garage last spring. I brought it back to its rightful place above the stove. Let it catch the light again. By midday, the guest room was bare. Curtains open. Air still. I opened the window just a crack. Enough to let in the smell of frost and distant chimney smoke. Let the space breathe again. Downstairs, Will was sorting papers into folders. Tessa stood near the door, phone in hand, tapping and scrolling. Not frantic, not angry, just done, and I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still. Later, I went to the grocery store, picked out fresh tulips, not the showy kind, just white ones, quiet and soft. At home, I placed them in the old blue vase by the sink. Their petals leaned into the morning sun like they were remembering something. I wiped the counters. Pulled the tablecloth from the drawer. Yellow with embroidered corners, slightly faded, exactly right. When dinner time came, I set 2 plates. Nothing fancy, just roast chicken and carrots, warm rolls from the oven. Will came down last. He paused at the threshold, eyes scanning the kitchen. His gaze landed on the table. For the first time in nearly a year, I'd set my place at the head, not because I needed control, but because it had always been mine. He didn't speak, just pulled out the other chair, sat quietly. We ate in peace. No tension, no explanations. Just the sound of forks against porcelain and the kettle humming low on the back burner. It wasn't repair. Not yet. But it was presence. And that was enough for now. The dishes clinked softly in the sink. Will stood beside me, sleeves rolled, drying one plate at a time. No rush. No phone in sight. Steam curled from the water. The air smelled of lemon soap and warm bread. It reminded me of the winters when he was little. When he'd drag a stool over to help, rinse spoons and end up soaked to the elbows. Now, he said nothing. Until he did, I let it happen. His voice was quiet, flat, no defense behind it. I didn't look up. He set the plate down, picked up a glass. I saw things, small things. The way she spoke to you. The way you stopped sitting at the table. The boots by the door never moving. I rinsed the pans slowly. Watched the suds swirl down the drain. I told myself you were just adjusting. That you wanted space. And you believed that? No. He admitted. I just needed to. I handed him the last fork. We stood there, hands dripping, surrounded by clean counters and silence. I was scared, he said, of losing both of you, so I chose the version that hurt less. I turned off the water, dried my hands. Once, I said, about a year after Hank died, I packed a bag. Just a small one, a few clothes, some cash, a photo. He glanced at me. I drove 3 towns over, found a motel, sat on the bed for an hour with the engine still warm. What made you come back? I met his eyes. I realized no one would notice I was gone. Not at first. Not until the towels ran out or the sink backed up. He swallowed. And that wasn't a reason to stay. But it was a reason to return and change something. We stood there. Not mother and son. Just 2 people learning how to speak again. He reached for the towel, dried the last glass, and placed it gently in the rack. I don't know how to fix all of it, he said. You don't have to, I replied. But you have to stop pretending it was never broken. He nodded. Turned off the light over the sink. We moved around each other easily. Comfortable. Not healed, but not hiding. He took the trash out. I wiped down the stove. And when he passed me the matches to light the last candle, our fingers brushed. Steady, familiar, quiet, like home coming back in pieces. Spring came quietly that year. No grand thaw, just the slow retreat of snowbanks. Drips from the eaves. Morning light that lingered longer on the kitchen tile. I stayed in the house. Not because I had to, but because it was mine. Tessa moved out 2 weeks after the conversation in the laundry room. No farewell. No apology. Just the sound of a suitcase wheel clicking down the front steps and a car door that didn't slam. Will didn't say where she went. I didn't ask. The baby was due in June. He said he wanted to be involved. I told him involvement begins with presence, not promises. He nodded and started showing up on Sundays, bringing groceries, asking about soup, washing his hands at the sink like he used to when he was 12. One morning, an envelope arrived, no return address. Inside was a small sketch, charcoal and soft pencil, my house, drawn from the back garden where the fence curls slightly near the lilac bush. At the bottom, one line in careful print, still standing, fee no signature, but I knew Kara's hand when I saw it. I pinned it to the fridge, right under Hank's old magnet shaped like a trout. That afternoon, another package came. Small, padded, no note. Inside, gray booties. The ones I'd made. Returned, carefully wrapped in the same tissue paper. I didn't cry, but I sat at the table for a long time, holding them. Soft, perfect, unclaimed. I placed them in the cedar chest, not out of sadness, but because some things don't need to be gifted twice. Later, I opened my notebook, the same one where I'd written my list in winter. This time the page was blank. Not for planning, for remembering. I wrote I did not disappear. They tried. Through silence, through soft smiles and quiet signatures, through the slow removal of pictures and pie crusts. But I stayed, with my boots planted in frozen soil and my name pressed into the beams of this house. Why I am still here. I folded the paper, slipped it into an envelope, marked the date, filed it under legacy, tucked behind old warranties and birthday cards. Then I put on my coat, stepped out to the garden. The rose beds were bare, thorned and waiting. Earth softening beneath my boots. I pulled on gloves, picked up the trowel, dug slowly, patiently, one row, then another. I planted new bulbs, daffodils this time, bright, stubborn, the kind that return each year without asking permission. When I stood, my back ached, but my breath was steady, my shadow long in the late afternoon. I wiped my hands on a towel, looked up at the window. My reflection looked back, at older, yes, but clear, whole. Inside, the kettle whistled. The couch sat waiting, a book resting open on the arm. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I needed to be invited in. I simply belonged. The roses bloomed by late May, small at first, pale buds, shy and stubborn, but day by day they opened, not all at once, not to impress. Just because it was time. I watered them each morning with the old tin can Hank used to keep behind the shed. The one Will used to call the rust bucket. It still held water just fine. By then, the house had found its new rhythm. Quiet, but not hollow. Still, but not stuck. Will came by on weekends. Sometimes with questions, sometimes just to sit. We didn't always talk about the past. That was its own kind of healing. One morning, he brought a new ultrasound photo. "She's healthy," he said, eyes soft. "And I've been reading those books you sent. The parenting ones." I smiled. "You're a little late." He laughed, rubbed the back of his neck. "But I'm showing up," he added. I reached for his hand, squeezed it once. "That's what matters." He left the picture on the kitchen counter. I didn't move it for 3 days. Just let it sit there, his offering. Not a fix, but a beginning. And beginnings, I've learned, are rarely loud. They show up in small gestures, unfold in quiet rooms, root themselves beneath leftover pain. One morning in June, I found a letter in the mailbox. From Tessa, no envelope, just folded once. "No, dear Eleanor, only this I was wrong, and I knew it the moment you didn't yell. The moment you let silence speak. I hope the baby never learns that kind of silence. And I hope someday she knows your name, even if I don't deserve to say it." It wasn't an apology. Not quite. But it didn't need to be. Sometimes the absence of cruelty is the closest some people ever get to kindness. I tucked the letter behind the fridge magnet with Kara's sketch. Not to forgive, but to remember. Because memory matters. Even the hard ones. Especially the hard ones. Years ago, I believed endurance was enough, that being quiet and dependable and useful would earn a place. That love could be proven through sacrifice alone. But I was wrong. Here's what I know now. Sacrifice without respect becomes expectation. Silence without acknowledgement becomes permission. And forgiveness, if forced, becomes just another way to disappear. I also know this. Legacy isn't about what you leave behind. It's about what you refuse to let go of. I kept the house. Not just the walls and windows, but the parts that made it mine. The copper kettle. The photo by the fireplace. The garden Hank planned on a napkin. The chair at the end of the table, now always set. I kept the parts of me they tried to repaint. And I'm still here. Older. Wiser. Rooted. The world doesn't applaud women like me. The ones who stay. Who hold families together with grocery lists and checkbook balances. Who make soup and take photos and hold their tongues until the day silence becomes betrayal. But that's okay. Because I don't need applause. I need truth. And this is mine. You can be gentle and still hold a boundary. You can be kind and still demand respect. You can forgive without forgetting. And you can reclaim your voice, even after years of being told you're too much, or too loud, or too invisible. The roses outside bloom now without asking permission. And so do I. If you're reading this, and someone made you feel like your time had passed, they're wrong. If they told you family only matters when you stay silent, they're wrong. If you're afraid that starting over at 60, or 70, or 80 is too late, they're wrong. Start anyway. Bloom anyway. Because quiet justice is still justice. Because healing after 65 is still healing. Because your voice still matters. Even if the only person who hears it is you. Especially then. Especially you. Some days, I still catch myself waiting. Waiting for the phone to ring. For the knock on the door. For someone to ask, what was it like? What was it like to lose control piece by piece? To watch your name removed from paperwork, from stories, from your own home. To smile through dinner while your place at the table shrank to a polite corner. It was quiet, too quiet. Like someone turning down the volume on your life, until you begin to wonder if you were ever really there. But here's what I've learned, dear. Disappearance doesn't always look like vanishing. Sometimes, it's being talked over. Sometimes, it's your photo missing from the hallway wall. Sometimes, it's a casserole dish returned clean, but without a thank you. And healing. Healing doesn't look like grand gestures. It looks like replanting old roses. It looks like saying no without raising your voice. It looks like finally calling the lawyer. Like making soup just for yourself and letting it simmer without anyone's approval. It looks like remembering your worth without needing a second opinion. We women of a certain age, we're taught to be gracious, to be forgiving, to be the bigger person. But sometimes, grace is knowing when to stop shrinking. Forgiveness is setting the boundary before the damage repeats. And being the bigger person means standing firm in the space they tried to erase you from. I tell you this now, because I wish someone had told me sooner. You are not a guest in your own life. You are not a burden, not a backup, not a placeholder in someone else's chapter. You are the narrator, the spine of the story, and stories like ours don't end in silence. They end in reclaimed rooms, in kitchen lights turned on again, in names rewritten where they always belonged. So if you're reading this, standing quietly in your own hallway of doubt, hear me when I say, you are not too late. You are not alone. You are not done. You are just beginning again, on your own terms. And that is more than enough.